There it is. That's a good one. Welcome, everyone. Today is Tuesday, May 3rd, 2022. Welcome to our meeting of the Carrboro Town Council. We have a soundtrack behind us tonight that I think will get us through the evening very well. We're going to start, as we always do, with a poetry reading by our poet laureate, Fred Joyner. Fred, welcome.
Good evening. I'm a poet in a tradition of poets who says uncomfortable things at challenging times. So I'm going to read a poem by not a famous poet today. This is a poem by a poet named Barbara Costa Biggs. It's from a website called Split This Rock. It's a website about politically engaged poetry. And this is a poem about women's bodies.
Thank you, Fred.
Naked in the Macy's changing room, trying to think of anything other than the election. Before I was grown and called lovers. Before I was a mother and called mama. Before I considered myself anything, I had a body. Smaller, tighter, in flux and full of flaws, yet always mine. At 18, I slept with a boy I met my first semester away from home. I didn't think I liked him much, but he liked me, and we moved in together. His father was a Republican with state political aspirations. I lived in Tucson, drove an hour away to Nogales to buy birth control at a Mexican pharmacy. No prescription, no questions, cheap. I ate tamales from a street vendor and brought homemade tortillas home, stretched and cooked over a 50-gallon drum. My slippery mind might be confusing parts of this memory. I was stone gin drunk living with a boy who told me when he first saw me naked, I wasn't sure I'd like your body. And when I got pregnant, told him over coffee. I made an appointment for an abortion. He walked to the bank, handed me $250. A few days later, I drove myself to an appointment in an Adobe strip mall. On the table, wearing one of his t-shirts, paint splattered, the doctor asked me if I was an artist. Thank you. You don't have to applaud. That poem was by Barbara Costa Biggs. Her bio is she lives in Eastern Kentucky. Her home is a small organic farm, and she lives as a law librarian. I invite you to go to this website, Split This Rock, and find these poems. These are important poems for important times. Thank you.
Thank you, Fred. You've marked this dark week in a way that I think is hard for many of us to do, and so I appreciate you taking the time and space to do that.
Thank you.
Um,
Have a good meeting. Thank you.
And I'll just say to folks who are feeling anxious and fearful today about the news that came out last night about Roe v. Wade, that we know in this community we often take for granted that our values are often available to us and accessible to us in the real world, and that we can actually access services that are needed by people. But we also know that, and I think many of us, including several of us on this council, have lived in a world since the early 70s when Roe v. Wade was a political reality. I think we also know that for many people, especially in the South, the promises of Roe v. Wade have not really been actualized for many people for a long time. And so the news we learned today is shocking, or yesterday is shocking, but also just a reminder of the threat that's been present before us for a long time now. So I encourage folks to learn about organizations in North Carolina and around the country, especially in states where these rights are under threat, who are directly supporting people who need access to abortion. And we'll see what the future brings to us in the next few months. But Fred, thank you for your words tonight. In the spirit of acknowledgments and on a very different note, I do want to say a very happy birthday to two of our council members today. We have a dual council birthday today. Randy and Danny are both a year older, and so happy birthday. I'm glad that you could be with us tonight.
There's a big smile under here.
Have an opportunity.
Thank you, Mayor.
Opportunity to reach our goal of this meeting ending at 8:45 in honor of our birthday boy and birthday girl.
It's all I ever wanted, Bill.
That's what our agenda says, and we'll see what we can do about it. Okay. I have no resolutions or proclamations to share today, and I think we've acknowledged the important news that's before the community today. So we'll move to the clerk for announcement of upcoming meetings. Mary?
Okay, the Environmental Advisory Board will meet on May 5th at 7:30. The Northern Transition Area Advisory Committee will also meet on May 5th at 7:30. The Planning Board meeting will meet on May 5th at 7:30, and that's a virtual meeting. The Transportation Advisory Board also on May 5th at 7:30, and that's a virtual meeting. The Recreation and Parks Commission meeting will meet on May 9th at 7 p.m., and it looks like that's a virtual meeting. And then our next Town Council meeting will be on May 10th at 7 p.m.
Great. Thank you very much, Mary. And I'll just be sure to note for folks who don't already know that Thursday, the 5th at 4 o'clock, at 203 South Greensboro Street will be our official groundbreaking of the 203 project with our friends from Orange County. So I encourage everyone to come out and enjoy the festivities. Looking forward to seeing lots of folks there. Randy?
Nope, that's what I was
That
going
was
to
it?
say.
Okay, great.
Woohoo! Join us for the groundbreaking.
Please do. Susan and then Barbara.
I just wanted to mention, Mary, I believe that Northern Transition Area Advisory Committee meeting has been canceled for Thursday.
Barbara?
Oh, thank you, Mayor. So I just want to take this opportunity to say hats off to our departments for showing up and showing out at Carrboro Day. Carrboro Day was really amazing. We had great music. We had representation from, I think, pretty much all our departments, correct, Mr. White? Yeah, even Mr. White was in attendance. And so, but he's everywhere. He's a community town manager, so that's not unusual. But I did want to take this opportunity to acknowledge our departments for representing so well at Carrboro Day. I think it was really a benefit for community members that were in attendance that day. So I just want to say hats off and thank you. And also just to mention, woohoo, keep voting, keep voting. Early voting is still going on with the primary being held on May 17th. Thank you.
Thanks, Barbara. Susan?
Thank you, Barbara. And just wanted to add one other quick announcement that this is Bike Month, and there are two events coming up. Wednesday, May 4th, Bike to School Day, and Tuesday, May 10th, we all get to ride with our mayor, beginning at 8 a.m. Where does that kick off from?
If you dare. Here, right out here in front of Town Hall.
Right.
So
We'll be there.
hopefully it'll be led by some very capable staff. But we'll see who shows up. Okay, thanks, y'all. Next on our agenda is comments from the public, and we do have one person, I believe, signed up to speak on a matter that is not on our agenda tonight, and that is Linda Hawk. Is Linda here? Hey, Linda, come on up.
Hey, you're welcome to.
And I'd sing you all happy birthday, but my piano teacher once told me I had no pitch. Actually, she asked if I was tone deaf. So anyway, I wanted to talk to you before the public hearing. I got in my inbox last night the draft of the comprehensive plan, and I only quickly went through it. I'm going to do some highlights. Richard has a copy, Trish has a copy of my comments, but the first one, and this comes not just from me, it comes from a number of citizens that I was able to contact. In the climate change section, there's a question about whether biodiversity crisis is addressed sufficiently, that is hand in hand with the climate crisis. And I think I'm trying to remember how many species we were going to lose out of the ocean. I thought it was something like 75%. There seems to be a very intense focus on development and infrastructure, on hardscaping basically, but open spaces are really important for biodiversity. Under the transportation and mobility map, the OS thing on page 66, Carolina North Forest, it reads, continues initiative to improve access and travel. I would assume either that should come out or should be changed given your resolution to take any pathway or completion of the Bowling Creek Greenway off. I do not know what travel means, but I do know that the Transportation Advisory Board recommended in the past that it was not adequate for a commuter. I do not know why a resident on 74, the quote was highlighted, again, related to the Bowling Creek Greenway being off the table for now, that the, what was his name? Greenways and bikeways so we can bike into town from the northern transition zone. And it doesn't say bikeways first, it says greenways first. I will tell you that the 2009 bike plan that is referenced as what to me is a foundational document, even though it's extremely out of date, had very, very limited citizen participation when it was drafted. And that comes not only from me, but your just recently former transportation planner. The Greenways Commission, when it looked at the consultant's master greenway plan from 2009, passed a resolution recommending against paving. And there are many, it's very detailed, but I will also tell you that whole idea of doing a greenway along Bowling Creek came out of a charrette. And it wasn't, elected officials brought it up, and the people there who were citizens did not back it, and I have the notes. Let's see. Trying to do this within my 3 minutes. Stormwater infrastructure. The planning for the stormwater management includes a reference to Bowling Creek Greenway Conceptual Master Plan of 2009. There is no way that plan addresses, that is a factual error. It's a huge error. It does not, that plan does not address stormwater, and it brings the whole town back into this whole debate about some people thinking that a paved pathway is going to solve erosion and streamwater, and it should most likely, I would assume, read the Bowling Creek Watershed Restoration Plan of 2012, which does have to do with stormwater. Also, in the chapter with the green box in Parks and Rec, the Greenway Master Plan has the wrong date. It should be 2009, not 2006. I bring these things to your attention now because I think that a lot of this is very delicate. A lot of neighborhoods do not feel like they were reached out to. This is a very important document, and there's a lot of controversy over, as you all know, the Bowling Creek Greenway, and and the bike plan did not include it. I mean, it was a rails to trails, which would be monumental and wonderful. So I just think language is really important, and especially not making factual errors.
Thank you so much for your close reading, Linda, and I appreciate you sharing those comments. And you mentioned that the manager has a copy of your comments, which will be really helpful to the staff for the future. Just on that one note about language, I will just note that we did direct staff in our final review of the document to be sure that the language we used in the ultimate plan, which is what should be reflected, although I haven't seen the adoption version yet because we're reviewing that next week, but we did make sure to direct staff to assure that that language is actually verbatim with what's in the updated 2020 bike plan. So those should be the same, and if they're not, then we'll go back and match them up. But
And I didn't have time to really do a close read, but I also want to say Carrboro Day was wonderful.
it was. Thank you, Linda. It's good to see you. Right. Okay, Mr. Manager, we're on to the consent agenda.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. The first item on the consent agenda is the approval of minutes from the February 22nd and March 1st, 2022 meetings with changes by Mayor Salles and Councilwoman Romaine. The next item is the Affordable Housing Advisory Commission funding recommendation. The purpose of this item is for the Town Council to consider approving recommended funding for one nonprofit affordable housing application to the Affordable Housing Special Revenue Fund. The next item is the independent audit contract for fiscal year ending June 30 of 2022. The purpose of this item is to award a contract for the town's annual independent audit for the fiscal year ending June 30, 2022. And the final item is an update to the town code illicit discharge provisions. The purpose of this item is to update the illicit discharge provisions in Chapter 5, Article 4 of the Town Code.
Thank you, Richard. Sammy, did you want to pull one?
The consent agenda.
Oh, great.
Yeah, the
Okay. There's a motion to approve the consent agenda. Is there a second? Can I get a second before we pull items?
Happy to second.
Okay.
Oh, damn.
Susan, go ahead, and then Randy.
And pull item number 3, please.
About you, Randy?
Who's going to pull 3?
Okay, Susan, go ahead.
Right. So this item is dealing with the renewal of our contract for the auditor. I wanted to pull this item, and I certainly do not want to in any way be micromanaging this important decision. I have too much respect for Arch and for you, Mr. Manager, to be doing that. So I wanted to make just a couple of comments in terms of our roles as stewards of the tax dollars. When we go back to the fiscal year 21 audit, I know, Arch, that you had let us know about some missteps, if you will. One was the financial statements were not filed in a timely way. Second, you as our chief finance officer, you were not told by the auditor that the town had received a financial performance indicator of concern letter. And then council, we were not told about this letter during the auditor's presentation to us in February. So I know that the question before us is renewing the contract, and I'm just trying to get a better understanding if the auditor ever, sort of accepted responsibility for, dropping the ball, if you will, sort of multiple times. And is there anything that we don't know about, their take on things that we should know? But my biggest concern is that right now it feels like we're renewing a contract without any consequences from what I thought was, to tell you the truth, less than professional services. And given it's a $60,000 contract, I just want to raise this point before council.
Thanks, Susan. Arch, welcome. Good. Thank you for being here tonight.
Good evening, Council. John and I had a very long we've had a couple of conversations about the audit, and it's unfortunate that we had the miscues. You know, I've been working with John and the firm ever since I've been here, and we've never had any miscues like this. It's always been professional. It's been good work. It's been on time. They sent a diverse team down here to do the work. You know, and John admits that, yeah, things did not go the way they should have. He understands that. He understands my concerns. He understands the council's concerns. In terms of, you know, what we can do right now is I think we need, you know, like I say, use this as a learning moment that we don't ever want to go back to again. And I have a lot of respect for John and his colleagues at the firm, and that one miscue did not change that. And I am confident that we will not have this type of problem again going forward. I am confident that the firm will deliver, you know, for the town. You know, and John understands, and I explained this to John. I says, I'm getting ready to recommend you, you know, for a contract. You know, I says, and I need some assurances so that I can give some assurances to my council that we're not going to go down this road again in the future. And we both agreed to no, we don't need to go down this road. So.
Good. That's very helpful. And I know that it's been, I think, a 16-year ride with this auditor, and it sounds like it's been a great ride every year up until this last year where there's some bumps in the road. I'm just curious, Arch, was there any suggestion by John to provide any kind of credit for the town in this fiscal year 22 audit, or any kind of specific, do you offer anything specific for the town as a way of saying we goofed up and we're going to make sure this doesn't happen again? Any particular system put in place, or, you know, like I say, any type of discount on our audit coming up as a way of compensating us? And mostly I'm thinking you, Arch, for all of you're the one who sort of incurred all of the cost of the missteps by the auditor in terms of the stress this put on you.
But thank you. You know, thank you for those sentiments, you know, but unfortunately those things happen to chief finance officers. You know, we just have to deal with them, you know, because we have work to do and we have to keep right on stepping, so to speak, so that the work continues to get done. If I remember correctly, in the proposals that they sent us, there is a discount, you know, shown at the bottom of that price proposal. You know, how much, I'd have to look and tell you exactly how much that was. You know, but other than that, we didn't talk about remunerations or rebating anything back, you know.
If you're good, I'm good, Arch.
I'm good.
All righty.
And if they don't work out, you will know it.
Thank you for raising that question, Susan. Arch, thank you. Randy, did you have a question?
I had a question, Arch. You fill us with such confidence, and I so thoroughly I underscore what Susan said about appreciating the precarious position that you were put in, and the stress and the anxiety that goes with that. I guess my question is whether or not we as a council, who, you know, are fiscally responsible for the taxpayers' dollars, should feel the confidence in Dixon Hughes, because, you know, what strikes me is that we have no leverage as to quality. If you know, a very long time ago, I left oops on the playground. And this feels like, oops, but we're going to go on and we're going to still not only give you the same contract, but we're not even going to acknowledge what that cost was, your taxpayers, in the next contract. Now, I understand that that's not something that in any kind of situation with auditors in general, municipalities do not, even if they argue that, they don't tend to get very far. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't be arguing it. I'm just putting it right out there. It's like there are certain times you have to acknowledge publicly, for the transparency of the community, that an error has been made, that it's not the fault of the town, and that the penalty that is coming from tax dollars, that's part of the money that's contributed to the town through taxes, it's not a cost that we anticipated, nor should we be punished for. And I guess it's a larger question. I personally would not have a problem looking to see who the other auditors are out there, which has nothing to do with you, nothing to do with your position, but it's a question for us as to whether or not we want somebody who is, saying, oops, forgive me, but the contract stays the same and we're not going to acknowledge in any financial terms that you still have to pay a penalty. And I say this because I have been here the 16 years, and every year I compliment Dix and Hughes, and I'm feeling awful that even this year when we were presented, I still complimented them, and they knew that there was a hiccup.
Well, a couple things. One, there were no financial penalties associated with the miscue. And secondly, we did issue an RFP for audit services back in March. We only had one response, and that was Dixon Hughes. The schedule of what, for doing an audit and what we have to get done does not allow us enough time to go back out to the marketplace and reissue the RFP. So most we can do is look at reissuing the RFP again next year, after, in the fall, after we get the audit done. Unfortunately, every municipality and county in the state seems to be looking for auditors. And but we can do that again. I was surprised that there were no other respondents, but again, it was just too late to try and redo that again, and ended up having to submit the audit late, which was a no-no. So one thing I would say that, if we really have a major problem with an auditor, I would go to the local government commission, who oversees all audits in the state and oversees the auditors, performing this work. Right now, I do not think it's necessary to go there. But if we should, if I think it should be necessary, I would not hesitate going. Of course, I would have to inform the council.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much, Arch. That's really helpful to have your perspective. All right, there's a motion by Sammy and a second by Danny to approve the consent agenda. Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
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 All opposed, please say no. The matter passes unanimously. All right, Mr. Manager, we're moving on.
The next item on the other matters is the annual update from the Owasa representatives and long-range water supply plan update. First item is to receive an annual update from the town's appointees on the Owasa Board of Directors, as well as an update to the long-range water supply plan.
Welcome, Yinka. And Yinka, since we do have some music in the background, if you'll just be sure to use the microphone there so we can,
I'll make sure
everyone can
to
hear you.
speak a little bit louder.
Perfect.
Right?
Thank you.
Perfect. Okay. Well, good evening, and thank you for inviting us to present our annual update. Jody Eimers, Owasa Board Chair, and I will provide updates On a few of Owasa's initiatives, Ruth Rouse, Planning and Development Manager, will provide an update on Owasa's long-range water supply plan, and Todd Taylor, Owasa's Executive Director, is available to assist in answering questions. So regarding our standard collection practices, as you know, Orange County was under a state of emergency from March 2020 through May 1st. And during this time, Owasa temporarily suspended service cutoffs for non-payment under our standard collection practices. Owasa announced yesterday, May 2nd, that we will resume standard collection practice on June 1st, 2022. Under our standard collection practices, a customer who misses 2 consecutive payments is subject to service disconnection. Given this timeline, the earliest that a customer would be subject to service disconnection would be August 1st, 2022. As of April 26, there are 548 households that are 60 days or more past due on their water and sewer bill. The average amount past due by these customers is $462. We continue to work with social service agencies across the region to make sure that our customers are informed of this change and connected to resources to assist them to pay their bill. We are sending emails, letters, and voicemails to all of our customers that are 30 or more days past due on their Owasa bill. We are offering fee-free 6, 12, and 18-month payment plans to customers who have bills that are past due to avoid service disconnection wherever possible. We will also be working to connect customers to resources of funding assistance. Since the beginning of the pandemic, Owasa customers have received over $235,000 in bill assistance from various programs, including Orange County Emergency Housing Fund, the Low Income Household Assistance Program, and Owasa's Care to Share program. The temporary federal supported Low Income Household Assistance Program still has funding, and Orange County Department of Social Services officials anticipate that funding will be available through most of next fiscal year. We understand the impact the pandemic has had on all our customers, especially those who now have accumulated bills throughout the last 2 years, and we are committed to working with them wherever possible to keep their water and sewer service connected. Now, regarding our diversity and inclusion, our program promoting diversity and inclusion is a top priority for Owasa, and we have had an active program since 2016. Owasa's diversity and inclusion efforts have included training for the Owasa board and team. An organization-wide survey was completed in March by Government Leadership Solutions, and this effort was part of an organizational assessment intended to guide and enhance our work. Owasa's team presents regular updates to the Board of Directors, with the latest presentation occurring in January 2022. Our diversity and inclusion efforts go beyond staff training, recruitment efforts, and policies by extending into growing partnerships within our community and expanding the minority and women-owned businesses that are bidding for and being awarded our projects and businesses. Now, regarding our strategic plan, Owasa is developing a new strategic plan to help guide Owasa's investment and priorities for our board and staff over the next 5 to 6 years. Since the January update, the task force on the Owasa team have focused on tackling strategic priorities that have been identified to this point. These task force will develop strategies and metrics to determine success for inclusion in the strategic plan. Owasa staff will continue to provide updates to stakeholders and the community throughout the strategic planning process. Regarding our Youth Water Academy, another cohort of interested area high school students graduated from the 2022 Youth Water Academy in April. And I might add this last cohort was from Carrboro High School. We are excited to be able to welcome these leaders of tomorrow into our facilities for an in-person youth academy after having to move to a virtual setting due to the COVID-19 pandemic. These students heard firsthand from Owasa's team members about our water supply, drinking water treatment process, resource recovery work at the Mason Farm water treatment plant, and more. This opportunity is open to high school students from Carrboro and Chapel Hill. The Youth Water Academy is geared toward helping these students understand the work that goes into providing these essential services to the community. This program meets several goals: educating the community, engaging with young people in our service area, and hopefully opening their eyes to the possibility of this as a future career opportunity to serve their community. And I might add that Chapel Hill High School has an Owasa club. Okay. So I'll pass it on to Jody.
Thanks, Yinka.
You.
Good to see you.
Love those colors, so rough.
Welcome, Jody.
Thank you kindly. So I'll begin with describing for you our testing wastewater for COVID-19, our program. Owasso was this will be easier. Owasso was contacted by the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services in December 2020 to request that Owasa participate in the National Wastewater Surveillance System, which was initiated by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. North Carolina is one of 23 jurisdictions participating in the National Wastewater Surveillance System. The data in this surveillance system are used by public health officials to better understand wastewater samples as a measure of the extent of COVID-19 infections in communities. The North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services requests wastewater data from 21 sites across the state, including Owasa's Mason Farm wastewater treatment plant. The North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services uses these data to assist in monitoring the prevalence of COVID-19 throughout North Carolina. Data from these 21 statewide wastewater treatment sites supplement other health data and are used to understand the impacts of COVID-19 at the community level. Results from the weekly monitoring are displayed on the North Carolina Wastewater Monitoring Network's North Carolina COVID-19 dashboard website. Beginning with the pilot phase of this study and continuing for the past 2 years, Owasa has been an active participant in monitoring. Twice a week, Owasa provides the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services untreated wastewater samples and flow and other treatment plant data. Owasa also serves as a resource for questions on wastewater treatment and monitoring processes. This is a valued partnership that provides our community important information, and we will continue monitoring into the future. I'll switch now to fiscal year 2023 draft budget. In advance of public hearings on Owasa's fiscal year 2023 budget and schedule of rates, the Owasa Board of Directors authorized staff to publish draft budget and rates information. This includes a proposed rate increase of 16%. This budget helps to ensure that we are investing in the community's water and sewer infrastructure at a level that decreases risks of failure in our systems and processes. Such failure would adversely impact Owasa customers and the environment. Note that while a 7% increase was originally projected for fiscal year 2023 rates, Owasa is facing many financial challenges impacting industries across our area and the country. Inflation has significantly increased the cost of supplies needed to treat the community's water and wastewater, as well as the cost of infrastructure construction and maintenance. This, coupled with a highly competitive labor market, is applying pressure to Owasa's budget. Additionally, water sales, Owasa's revenue, if you will, remain below projections. The proposed fiscal year 2023 budget also covers the costs of deferred infrastructure investments and upgrades to technology critical to operations and billing. The board made these deferments to ensure that rates were not increased in 2022 during the height of the pandemic. These systems are now approaching the end of their useful lives and need to be upgraded before becoming security risks. As Owasa is updating the community's long-range water supply plan, investments will also be needed to ensure that we can continue providing essential water services to customers through 2070. These investments account for 1% of the proposed rate increase for fiscal year 2023. A 16% increase in rates, if approved, will raise the average monthly residential bill for Owasa customers by $12.71 to $92.17. Any adjustment to rates will go into effect October 2022. I'll move on to updates about the Owasa Board of Directors. And this is my final topic before moving on to Ruth.
All right, could you restate the 1% increase part? I didn't quite understand that.
Yeah, we are working on a long-range water supply plan, and we are including a 1% budget increase. Of the 16, 1% of that is to accommodate the costs of the new sources of water, planning for that.
And the 16 represents what?
16 represents what we feel is necessary for adequate operational and capital
General.
improvement costs. Yeah.
And then what was the dollar difference between the two?
The average customer will pay on their monthly bill $12.71 more per bill, which means they have a total payment of $92.17.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Okay. Now we'll talk about the Owasa Board of Directors. And I think you've heard this from me before, but you're going to hear it again. The Board of Directors is a 9-member governing body. Our board is piloting a new meeting schedule to consolidate meetings to once per month. The board had previously been meeting twice per month. This new schedule went into effect in March and will be assessed over the summer. Each board member receives a small remuneration to cover expenses associated with serving on the board. At the March 10 meeting, the board increased board member compensation to encourage public interest in applying for appointments to the board. The Carrboro Town Council, you all, appoint 2 of the 9 board members. But for an entire year, Carrboro has had just 1 appointee to the board. And the term for that one Carrboro appointee, Yinka Iankoya, will end next month. Yinka is a valuable member of the board, and she has served for 6 members on the board. In fact, when I first joined the board, Yinka already had 2 years service, and I asked her to mentor me. And she taught me a great deal about what's expected of me and helped me quite a bit. The board deals with many complicated issues, and it really helps to have senior members share their experiences and insights on these matters, many of which, like setting rates and approving the budget, recur each year. The only real requirement to serve on the Owasa Board of Directors is a commitment to serve your community. It takes time and effort to prepare for meetings and deliberate. You don't have to be an engineer or scientist to serve effectively. But if you, the town council, don't replace Carrboro appointees as they come open, if you wait months or even a year to make an appointment, we run the risk of having a preponderance of new board members who lack familiarity with water and sewer utility. And yet, these are the people who are charged with making policy and budget decisions. Another problem that the board encounters if appointments are not made in a timely manner is that at times, and this happened 2 months ago, the board of directors cannot make a quorum, so we are unable to fulfill our obligations. Having a full board is critical to being able to keep the important work of the community's water and wastewater utility moving forward and preparing for the future. As a current chair of the board, I'm asking you to appoint 2 members of the Owasa Board of Directors in a timely manner, and I thank you very much for your support in making these appointments. Yes.
Barbara?
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Jody, for laying that out for us. I had a couple of questions about the Owasa board updates. And so I also want to take this opportunity to thank Yinka Ayankoya for her. I believe she's been on for about 6 years of steady service with the Owasa board. I've been trying to talk to her, but to no avail so far to get her to come back. But I say all that to say, you know, the demographic makeup of the board is something that I look at. Yinka, I believe, is the only person of color currently serving.
Right.
And she's going to go off in June.
Yeah.
So this is a priority for this board.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time that you're wanting us to, you know, to fill those 2 seats. And we understand that. We understand about quorum and the need for the governing board to go on with the work, but also realize how important it is for us, you know, to try to put somebody forth, you know, potentially, you know, a BIPOC person to replace Yinka.
Yeah.
And sometimes we run into difficulty, you know, with that in our recruitment. And so you got those 2 things, you know, going on, the need to fill the seats to get the quorum, and then also wanting to have folks of color serving on the Owasa board. So this is just kind of where we are. I'm not saying we're not going to fill it, but, you know, certainly we have some things kind of bumping up against each other.
Yeah, well, you know, the board undertook some recruitment efforts. We approached some minority communities, asking them to apply. And so, you know, we feel like we've done everything we can to encourage applications to the board. We consider it in our, and how much money we give board members a compensation.
That's another question.
Yeah, how much?
Yeah, because I remember what it used to be, but then you said that now you've kind of changed the amount of money or bumped it a little bit.
Well, we used to have 2 meetings a month, and a board member would receive $50 per meeting. We have 1 meeting a month, and board members receive $100 per meeting.
I'm
But-
coming back.
Something better than town
Yeah,
council.
so it's status quo, because we have just as much work to do. There's a
Right.
lot of work that we do preparing for meetings, and we cover just as much material every month.
All right.
We tried, but you know, with asking for a 16% rate increase, we just couldn't. I just couldn't convince anyone that it was worth it. I mean, we want minority members, and we realize that they have unique, perhaps you have unique, especially younger people of any color, for support for their children while they're at the meeting, perhaps some transportation costs. And I think $100 will cover that, and we're certainly willing as a board to help out with transportation, picking people up and that sort of thing, and providing a laptop if that's necessary. We have considered these issues.
So thank you so much, Jody, and thank you for your leadership on the Owasso board.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Jody.
I
and
learned it
thanks
from
for,
Yinka.
Thanks for your time today, Jody, and for reminding us again of the urgency of our making appointments to the board. We have been talking about it and know that we need to do it soon. So I encourage council members and staff to continue putting the word out and finding candidates who might be interested. We do have a handful now, but we'd like always to have a even bigger applicant pool. Ruth, welcome.
Thank you. I'm Ruth Rouse, Owasa's Planning and Development Manager, and I really want to thank you all for having us here this evening. Our long-range water supply plan is one of our strategic initiatives, and it's really important to the board as well as staff to get your all's feedback as well as feedback from the community. So what are we going to learn this evening? Number one, it's really good news for the community. We're really low risk of running out of water. But we do have a vulnerability, and that's if we got an extended drought. And we'll talk a little bit about that. And the board of directors has determined that Jordan Lake is the best alternative for us to move forward with. And they were very deliberate in their use of the word to augment our current supplies, noting that really we're still going to largely rely on our existing supplies, which are University Lake, Cane Creek Reservoir, and our Quarry Reservoir. And then finally, there is a group of local utilities that is partnering to build a new intake and treatment plant on the west side of Jordan Lake. They're moving forward, and so the Owasa board needs to determine whether we want to partner with them and to what extent, if so. So this is a process that we followed. You have a question, Barbara, or are you just stretching?
No, I'm just putting my jacket on. I'm sorry.
It's okay. So this is the process that we followed to develop the long-range water supply plan. That step number 9 is where we are right now with community engagement, and that followed the board's selection of our preferred alternative of accessing Jordan Lake. And they came up with that after doing a community engagement a little over a year ago. And they really built in feedback that we heard from the community into a set of guiding principles that they developed to evaluate the different alternatives against. And then you see all these other blue circles on here, and those all happened in open discussions with our board of directors. And I looked at how many meetings there were, and they've met 27 times about the long-range water supply plan and reviewed over 800 pages of agenda materials for those discussions. And those agenda materials are all on our website. So this is the good news graph. So that blue line shows our estimated yield of our 3 local supplies. So again, Cane Creek Reservoir, University Lake, and the Quarry. We currently have about 10.5 million gallons per day of supply. And you'll see that that will bump up in the early to mid 2030s when our expanded Quarry Reservoir will be online, and we'll have about 12.6 million gallons per day of water available then. And those black diamonds represent our historic demands, and you can see from 1980 up to the early 2000s, it was pretty much a straight line projection that we were increasing. And then there was a drought in 2001-02, and the community really reduced their water demands. And they've continued to conserve really well, and Owasa has put some practices in internally in how we operate, as well as some how we do rates and things like that that help encourage conservation. And one of the big things is that we partnered with UNC to develop our reclaimed water system. So if any of you don't know what reclaimed water is, it's the use of highly treated wastewater that is then used for non-drinking water purposes. So the university uses it for cooling buildings, toilet flushing, irrigating. The board recognized that when you're looking out 50 years, we do want to plan out, because if you have to develop a new water supply, it takes decades to do that. That there's a lot of uncertainty in that. So they requested that we do an uncertainty analysis on that, and that's shown by that gray shaded area. The board also wants us to point out that even though that yield line is shown as a solid blue line that makes it look like we really know what we're talking about, there's uncertainty in that as well, but it's a much more difficult and costly analysis. So depending on how those assumptions pan out, that blue line could shift up or down. I think one thing that's key for the community to understand is that if we have a new drought of record, it will shift down. So here's the risk. We get most of our supply from Cane Creek Reservoir. It supplies over 80% of that yield that we saw in that prior graph, but it has a very small drainage area. It and University Lake have the same size drainage area. They're each about 30 square miles. So when I say drainage area, any rain that fell within that 30 square mile area would eventually make it down to that reservoir. So along the y-axis on this graph, we see triangle area water supply reservoirs. And then along the x-axis, we're seeing how much water do they store to how big is their drainage area. So you can see that Cane Creek Reservoir is much higher than any of the other ones. And this will get exacerbated when we bring the expanded quarry online. The quarry does not have its own watershed, so we have to fill it with water from Cane Creek. So if we got in an extended drought, it would take a long time to be able to refill those two supplies. So that's where Jordan Lake really helps address that vulnerability if we get into drought. So Owasa has had a history of proactively planning for its water supplies. Before Owasa was formed back in 1969, the idea came forward for building Cane Creek Reservoir. And that was filled and operational at the end of 1989. So it was 20 years. If we were doing that today, it would take much longer to get permitted, if you could even get it permitted today. The Quarry Reservoir, we purchased that in 1979, which doesn't seem that long to me. But when I think about it, it's over 40 years ago. And that is not going to be fully available to us until the early to mid 2030s. So you're talking over 50 years between when we first had that idea to when it comes to full fruition. And so now we're down to Jordan Lake. So we've had an allocation from Jordan Lake since 1988. However, we don't have any guaranteed access to that allocation. So now it's time for us to start thinking about how can we guarantee some access to that to meet that drought, particularly address that drought vulnerability. When we went to the community about a year ago, one of the questions that we heard was, what about water quality in Jordan Lake? Will that water be safe to drink? So hundreds of thousands of people in the Triangle do drink it on a daily basis. We reviewed drinking water data from Town of Cary as well as Chatham County for the past 5 years, and they consistently meet drinking water standards. So there were no violations over that 5-year period. And also the proposed water treatment plant that I mentioned earlier that the Western Intake Partners is developing, they are collecting a lot of data near their proposed intake site and making sure that they're designing that plant to meet drinking water standards and even future ones that they see coming down the pipeline. So we're confident as staff at Owasa that we can get safe drinking water from Jordan Lake. So what was the process for coming up with these alternatives and how did we get to Jordan Lake? So we initially met with staff at Carrboro and Chapel Hill, UNC hospitals, and said, bring us all your big, hairy ideas. They can be for supply, so that would provide more water, so it would move that blue line on that graph up, or they can be demand management, so things that would shift our demands down, so that gray shaded area would move down. So you can think of those as more conservation type oriented alternatives. So then Owasa staff took those and we did kind of back of the envelope comparisons, and we looked at what's the relative cost of each of those, how much water do they supply or save, and then what kind of implementation issues might there be with them. So we eliminated groundwater and stormwater as supply sources, and then we also eliminated some of the demand management sources. At that point, we brought in consulting help to look at these issues with us, and they looked at, there were about 15 or 16 supply and demand side management, roughly half of each, and looked at them through the lens of sustainability. So looked at what are the economic impacts, so they did a much more detailed cost analysis, and they looked at social as well as environmental impacts. At this point, we brought it out to the community about a year ago and heard information from you all. The board used and feedback that they heard to develop these guiding principles. So when we looked at them against the, at that point too, we also removed demand side management strategies. The rest of those, there were some that we are pulling into a water conservation plan. And then we also eliminated indirect potable reuse. So that would be taking kind of wastewater and putting it back into one of our water supplies, so like University Lake or the Quarry Reservoir. So that left us with 5 alternatives that the board used those guiding principles to evaluate. And based on that, the direct potable reuse as well as the deep quarry option fell off the list, and that brought us to Jordan Lake. Now, the board has not yet determined which of those Jordan Lake alternatives is the best. So there's kind of a little continuum of options that they can be looking at and how we can use Jordan Lake. And to provide a little bit more information, I did want to just quickly flash up what the guiding principles were. They told us it has to be able to meet drinking water standards, or we don't want to see that. And then the highest priority were the ability to reduce that vulnerability to drought, the reliability and resilience of the water supply system, and then what's the impact on near-term rates. And then they had other ones that were also high priority, but they wanted to look at them in a slightly less priority. What's the impact on longer-term rates? What are the impacts on the environment, as well as the social impacts, and as well as the flexibility to change course? So this stacked bar chart shows the 5 alternatives. So status quo is just continuing to use our mutual aid agreements. Then 2 alternatives for Jordan Lake, one being a partner in which we invested in the treatment plant as well as the intake and transmission infrastructure. Then a second one that would be a new type of agreement that would set up with those Western intake partners to guarantee some kind of access in exchange for some kind of annual payment. The deep quarry option, and then direct potable reuse, which is taking highly treated water at the Mason Farm wastewater treatment plant and effectively putting a water treatment plant on the back end of that and then pumping it directly into the distribution system. So you can see that Jordan Lake did the best when you look at it against the highest priority guiding principles. It has the highest level of those blue bars, and it also, those 2 scored the best when you look at all those guiding principles together. So the top of the gray bars on those 2 alternatives. And with, I'm getting ahead of myself. So the Western Intake Partnership, it is the City of Durham, Chatham County, and Town of Pittsboro, and they've been working together since 2014 on regional water supply issues. And Owasa has been participating in discussions with them, but to date we have not participated financially. So that's part of the reason for that 1% increase that Sammy was asking about. And the board has given us, here's interests that we want to maintain as we talk to the Western Intake Partnership. And I think the first 4 are probably of most interest to you. And that is that we have access to our allocation of water in Jordan Lake when we need it. And then we also want to maintain that allocation as we grow. We want that available for future generations, just like that Quarry Reservoir was put there for us to be using today. We also recognize that some of the infrastructure is very difficult and very costly to expand in the future, so namely the intake as well as the transmission infrastructure. So one thing is that the board has expressed they'd like to make sure that that is built to meet Owasa's future needs. And then we also recognize that because we're low risk, we want to try to minimize that near-term impact on rates, but there is a trade-off between some of those. And with that, I am going to turn that back over to you all. And if you have any questions for me, I'm happy to answer them. And if there's any feedback you want to make sure that we take to the full board of directors, I know Yinka and Jody are here this evening, but we'll make sure we pass it on.
Ruth, thank you so much for the concise but very informative presentation. And it's good to see you again, this time in person. I know that, so council members, we do have a little bit of time for some questions for Ruth. So I'm going to start with Randy and then go to Sammy and then Susan.
Okay, first I want to thank you, Yinka, for your service. Oh my God, 6 years. Good for you. That is awesome. Especially when you consider how much time of that was during the pandemic when many tough decisions needed. And I want to thank you, Jody and Ruth, for being here. And I'm just going to say this after serving on the council as many years. It's wonderful to see 3 women at the helm at Owasa. So thank you. I hope only 2 questions. One is Jody had mentioned news sources, and I'm assuming so the key news source is Jordan, correct? Okay. So I have a history of concern for Jordan, huge, and of late, and within the last year or 2, particularly the presence of PFAS and PFOA, not only in the Haw River but also in Cane Creek. Okay, so part 1 of the question is, were we to be looking at Jordan Lake, the treatment facility that's potential for the west side that you're talking about, is that treatment plant one that would include the PFAS, PFOA treatments of the ionization and carbon.
Yeah, they're definitely monitoring for those parameters, and they're also looking at treatment. So they're not even, and they're going to be doing little pilot tests on actual Jordan Lake water to see how effective different treatment is on Jordan Lake water specifically. So
Will that be done before you're entering into discussion of potentially partnering for that facility?
they have hired consultants. I mean, they're moving forward right now with that. So yeah, it depends on how quickly the board, the board has indicated that they support us participating financially. I think it's important that we're at the table, regardless of how the board decides to move forward, whether that's kind of investing in infrastructure or doing this type of agreement. We need to be at the table so we make sure our interests are met.
And short range, knowing that PFAS, PFOA has shown up in King Creek, and I understand the amount is very small, but it's the kind of material that it's not going anywhere.
Correct.
And so over time, it's only going to accumulate. It's not going to dissipate. My question is, does Owasa, part of the infrastructure, strategic planning for infrastructure, include within the Mason Farm Road facility treatment for ionization or carbonization for the
For our water plant here on Jones Ferry?
Correct.
Yeah, we do add carbon. We are effectively removing some of those materials. We do have a PFAS dashboard on our website, if you've seen that. So we publish all our data that we're collecting data quarterly, and we do publish that on the website.
So I just, what is the game plan to keep community aware that you're aware? It seems when I talk to folks in the community, they are not aware of Owasa's initiatives to address the concern because we live downstream of the, where this heavy metal is coming from.
So I don't know, Todd, if you have anything to add to this, but, we do have our website that we put out there, but I don't know if we have any specific, I know our communications people stay on top of it, but are there specific communication initiatives on PFAS other than our website?
We're definitely monitoring the levels and we are publishing all that information. That's about the extent.
Yeah, I would just recommend getting out ahead. I mean, we live in a community. We're very fortunate to have many folks who are who know the science, who are on top of the science. Many EPA scientists live right here. And in addition, and this is in full disclosure, I'm on TJ Cog. I'm involved with the One
Water?
Mm-hmm.
Good.
So, yeah, it's good, but we keep raising the same questions,
Yeah.
But so the point is that, we know that given the heavy metal quality that we're dealing with, this is something that doesn't go away but will accumulate, and rather than when there's an issue, as there was, I guess it was like about a year ago now.
Pittsburgh?
Yeah, exactly. Rather than being reactive, I would just encourage Owasa to get out ahead of the narrative of not only but did you know, yes, this exists. It exists everywhere in North Carolina. I mean, I work with folks who are down east, and the problem is huge. So to me, I would just really like to see that, and I also would appreciate continued discussion on the COVID wastewater. And how do we know? I think I was on the website and trying to figure out how localized. In other words, if we could extract the hospital, right, and UNC's wastewater and just know municipally, what that number is, what would that look like? So I'd love to be able to have, not only know that for myself, but have community understand what is our wastewater look like in terms of viral load of COVID. Thank you.
Thanks, Randy. Sammy's next, and then we'll go to Susan.
Thank you for your presentation and thank you for your service, Yinka. Well, firstly, so it's twice a week that goes to the North Carolina Department of Human Health Services, the samples on COVID, correct? Is that what you said? and then that has been twice a week since the time we've been doing those samples. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so I guess my interest is, as of late, the reporting on wastewater has been not only delayed, but become weekly. And this may not be for y'all, but to whatever extent, maybe it's a matter of the local county government health department collaborating with Owasa so that we can do those tests ourselves, or speaking to the North Carolina Department of Human Health Services to facilitate that much quicker. Because what's happening now is we aren't doing public health in the same way. We're leaving it to individual responsibility. And yet, simultaneously, we aren't doing as good a job in providing the information by which people can make informed decisions. And so I'd be interested in finding a way in which to facilitate that information so that if we are going to go down this route of leaving it to individual decision-making, that we at least provide the right information for them. So any ideas for how that conversation can happen? Yeah, so for you, it's just gathering the sample and delivering it to whoever it may be. Okay. Got it. Okay, good to know. So sounds like a conversation for this council to convey to our county health department and our county. Thank you. The other thing is, for as long as I've been on this council, demand side management has always been thought of as like we've met the capacity for achieving more results in that regard. And yet, since I've been on this council, the line has been sustained in terms of demand on our water supply. And so, and it's also reflected in the assumptions Owasa does. As you mentioned, the expectation of sales for water has not been as high as Owasa has been expecting. What I'm wary of is that we are going to be committing to some major infrastructure investment granted with other partners on Jordan Lake, and that demand will continue to be as it is, and yet we will have to increase rates because we will have made that commitment. And I remember seeing when alternatives were being considered that direct potable reuse was really a good, it was cheap compared to a Jordan Lake. The main issue with it was that it's currently not legal in North Carolina. It seemed like the main barrier. And at the time, there's an interest to explore that with our legislature, and for whatever reason, that hasn't happened. So I guess my question is, given the significance of the impact this may translate into higher rates for our citizens, your customers, to what degree do you feel like there is still a chance to look at the other alternatives, whether it be demand management or direct potable reuse?
Yeah, so direct potable reuse is a little more expensive than Jordan Lake. If you're investing in infrastructure, it will be kind of in the same ballpark, I would say.
Does that include like a maintenance? Because you'd be paying annually to cover the cost of Jordan Lake. Does it include? I assume like direct potable reuse, you're switching it on and off depending on whether there's an actual need, and that it's not this.
I think you'd have to continue running it. I don't know enough from operationally, but I think you'd have to maintain some amount of flow through it. I know through our regular treatment plants, water plant, we need to do that. So it isn't something that you can easily switch on or off. And then in terms of, the demand side management just either provide very little kind of savings, sometimes at a very high cost per gallon. There are some that are cost effective that we do want to pursue and look at as part of our conservation plan. But when we evaluated them, when you're looking out 50 years, yeah, it's not going to be sufficient.
Yeah, 'cause
And they don't address that drought vulnerability. And that is something that we feel, personally, I feel very like I want to make sure we're being responsible there, because it's not when drought will, or if drought will happen, it's going to happen. And it just depends on when.
Great, thanks. So when we look at the graph of how it was skyrocketing, and then we hit the drought, and then we implemented some demand management measures, it was triggered by the drought, but the effect was sustained
Yes, it
thereafter.
was, yeah.
So the point being is like, we still are just thinking of it as like a measure for when there is drought, but it is also these low-hanging ways of doing demand management are effective in changing people's behavior and maintaining less demand on our supply. And so, our history clearly shows that. That's where it dropped down so much. And then the potable system at UNC came online, but its reduction wasn't nearly as much as what the drought caused. So I'm just like, I'm wishing that we could learn from those experiences and really give them more weight than I feel that they have been given in the assessment of what the best alternatives are.
Yeah, and I hear you, and from an environmental perspective, there's a lot to be said for conservation and demand management. It does a lot, not just in terms of treatment plant capacity and raw water supply, but energy and all kinds of stuff. So I do very much support that. However, I also, as sitting in the position that I'm in, we have a water shortage response plan, and all the modeling we're doing is assuming that we're going to get the reductions that were put in there after the drought of 2007-08. And it's like 80% of our billing is at those first two tiers, so under 5,000 gallons a month people are using. So my question is, when we get into drought, how much more are we going to be able to get from people? So I hear you, and but I also feel like I need to be planning.
Generation.
So, because running out of water is just not an option.
Right.
So I'd feel like I wasn't doing my job if I wasn't trying to think of these things.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, I was just also thinking in terms of when we do hit drought and you need to reduce demand. I guess if you have a bigger supply, then you wouldn't be reducing demand. You assuming Jordan Lake doesn't dry up. Because that's the other thing. There's a lot of pressure on these new developments in Chatham County, and questions even with that supply whether we will be safe. Anyways, thank you for all your information. As
Absolutely.
the council's heard, I'm very much interested in fully assessing in a better, from my perspective, more thorough way the possibilities of leveraging demand management and looking into the possibility of pursuing direct potable reuse for whatever it's worth.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sammy. Susan?
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you, all three of you, for your presentations this evening. It's been really helpful. And Yinka, I'll join the chorus of saying thank you for your service to Owasa. You'll have big shoes to fill for us. In the spirit of the two birthdays, I'm going to keep my questions really brief. I did a crash course in water management by reading through the materials. So one thing that stood out to me was that Owasa is a community-owned utility. And I'm curious if, as a community-owned utility, if we have tended to have higher drinking water standards than other utilities. And if that is the case, I'm curious about joining this partnership, and how is it that we are able to hold on to our high standards when others may want to just meet the standard as opposed to exceed the standard, which I'm gathering we are doing right now.
So, the utilities in the triangle have been working together in terms of water supply planning. Ms. Haven O'Donnell pointed out the Jordan Lake 1 water, which is quality. And I feel like when I meet with them, they do take their jobs very seriously. And they do want to design this plant so that it can meet standards. And I know that they are also talking about pursuing Envision, which is kind of a LEED certification, but for infrastructure. And it's been mostly used for transportation planning, but they're applying it to this water treatment plant as well, and have gone through a lot of exercises to look at what they want in terms. So they are looking at sustainability. They are looking at making sure that it's going to be treating the water to meet public health criteria. And, you know, if we join in with them, there will be an interlocal agreement that would be signed that would, it looks like Durham would be the lead agency through an interlocal agreement type arrangement. And that interlocal agreement, I know that Todd and I and our attorney will all make sure that they have to meet all drinking water standards. So
This will be Durham, Chatham County?
And Pittsburgh.
And Pittsburgh. Okay. One other question, and I can't let this I can't let it go because it's the rate increase. So proposed 16% rate increase coming at a time that our moratorium is ending. In terms of resuming to, I guess, your normal collection practices. I forget the word, standard collection practices. So right now, 548 community members, 60 days past due. I've got to believe that number will, I'm just reciting that from a presentation, but I've got to believe that number will go up and could go up quite a bit, which worries me. I know it worries everybody. What will you all be doing to let folks know about how they can get billing assistance? And what can the town do to amplify that?
So our strategic initiatives manager is working with several of the local agencies to make sure that that word gets out, that she partners in with our affordability outreach program. So using those partnerships really to help get that word out, and then through social media, through I think you retweeted something today or tweeted something today.
Thank you,
Yeah, so that's how. And Todd, do you have anything to add to what all Mary's doing? I know she's doing a lot.
We're trying to direct every single one of those customers we have available. Been very successful as far as coding issues. Been able to access over almost.
Mm-hmm. Was there a rate increase during the pandemic, or is that part of why? I know you provided the reasons for the 16%, and I know that we know a little bit about inflation here with the town too, but I was curious if part of that 16% is delayed rate increase because you were not wanting to do that during the pandemic.
The first year of the pandemic, we had no rate increase, and we also experienced about a 12% reduction in water sales during that same time. So we delayed and deferred numerous projects, no pay increases for our staff, all of those cost-cutting measures that we could implement during that time. Unfortunately, it's catching up to us now.
Mm-hmm.
We anticipated that we were going to do a 7% increase. Never
Mm-hmm. Thank you all so much.
Thanks, Susan. And
Appreciate
I
all you're
apologize
doing.
to folks
Mhm.
listening at home. I probably should have asked Todd to come up to the microphone to share his information, but just in response to Susan's question about rate increases, there was not a rate increase in the first year of the pandemic. Meanwhile, there have been these rising supply and materials costs and so on, and that's causing some pressure on the budget. That's the long story short version of what I took from what Todd, and of course, in addition to what Jody offered earlier. So thank you. I have Barbara and then Danny.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a question for you, actually, or you or Mr. White. So do we know when the Owasso appointments are coming onto the agenda? Will it be this month or will it be next month?
I mean,
Do you know? Have you
yeah,
scheduled?
we haven't scheduled it. Richard and I haven't talked about a specific date. We've talked about it needing to be soon.
Okay.
I would have liked to get it on as soon as next week if we can, for at least one of those appointments, because we know we've had one of them vacant for, as Jody reminded us, a year. But certainly by the end of that season, at the end of June, when Yinka's appointment will be ending, we will then have 2 vacancies. So I certainly at the latest at the end of June, I would.
Got it. Thank you. And so, what's the meeting day and the time? And I know you're still meeting virtually, just for information. Is it still the first Thursday? Wh- Okay. Okay. Cool. So that was just for information. So, do you have a presentation? Are you doing yours from over there? Okay. All right. I see you over there supporting. From the corner. I know I appreciate the information under standard collection practices and the links that you're going to try to make sure that the customers know what their resources are as far as, having assistance and also offering the fee-free 6, 12, and 18-month payment plans, because I agree with Mayor Pro Tem Romaine that this number, 544, it's probably going to go up. So I appreciate all the information that you're providing the Owasa customers, in any way that you can. I just think that it's, you can't do too much of that. So I'm looking at your, in response to Councilmember Haven O'Donnell, the birthday lady, this evening. I see on your website the PFAS monitoring program. So you've been doing it quarterly since 2018. Is that, who am I looking at?
Sounds right, yeah.
I look at you.
He's probably knows more about the PFAS monitoring than I do, but.
Oh,
shoot.
okay. Yeah, so I'm just reading. I guess my question about it is there any way to, I guess, I don't know, engage community more around it? Or, I mean, there's good information here. I see a lot of good information here, but it's just getting people to kind of attach and know that that information is there and that it's available. Maybe through your communications or your whoever.
Yeah, we'll pass that on to their communications folks.
Okay. Yeah, I see it here. It looks, it looks great. I think I had, that might have been the only questions I have. And I think it is for now. And thank all of you for coming. I mean, this is really a very clear, well thought out report with a lot of good information on updates. So thank you.
Thanks, Barbara. Danny?
Yeah, thank you. And this is probably more for Todd, but I guess I'm curious. So it sounds like with these looming potential shutoffs, we have both like grant and bill assistance methods, which kind of erase payment. And then we have payment plan opportunities at 6, 12, and 18 months. And I'm just curious, I know it's kind of like a hard thing to hit. It's probably not something you'll have tonight, but whether you could provide over the next couple of weeks a sense of the capacity of that system in total to service what is like back of the envelope $260,000, right? So is in our experience, are 100% of those debts able within this total, or are we going to probably see like I understand this is not really like a question about your efforts. I hear really good faith to make sure that nobody is shut off. some people probably will be with what we can historically predict. And so I guess I'm curious whether you're able to provide the town with a measure of what we understand those shortfalls to be so that we can just talk about what we're able to do about that.
Sure, we'd be happy to. I would say we want to see how this rolls out. We're going to make all efforts to connect people with assistance out there. We do realize that there are probably some folks in this group that have essentially taken a bill holiday for a while. So when we implement standard collection practices, they're going to come in, pay their bill. So, there's obviously a percentage that will fall into that. We do feel like we've provided a great deal of assistance to low-income customers throughout this because they've had the most access to the majority of the funds. However, I'm sure there have been a few that have slipped through on this, but we will definitely, when they come in, we'll connect them with available funding. But the payment plans will be for anyone that wants to participate in that, so that program won't be restricted to any sort of eligibility. You've got a bill that's due. Here's a process, we'll offer to them to say, would you like to set up a payment plan to do this? So I think there's a lot of different avenues for folks. We have our Care to Share program. We have a lot of different things that we can offer in this. We do expect that number to come down significantly. I mean, the number where it got to before a lot of these federal funds became available, it was much more significant than what it is now. So we've been able to do quite a good amount of reduction in the overall amount that was in arrears, and we expect that was going to come down. But I'm certain there will still be, unfortunately, a group that will end up in August that will be on that list, and we'll keep you all informed about how that progresses as we go forward. But I would say let's let this plan kind of roll forward, see how effective we are at connecting folks with the resources, and then we'd love to talk with you all about how we can collaborate on maybe closing that final gap.
Totally. Very much appreciate the answer and the consideration.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Todd, for that. Sammy.
Just a follow-up. Sorry, I finally found the report that had been presented to the board in 2020, August of 2020, where you lay out the different options for supplying. And the direct potable reuse is, it does say it's not currently legal in North Carolina. Has that changed?
Oh.
It hasn't changed. Okay. And then in terms of the cost, it says it's high capital cost, but acceptable NPC and NPC per gallon of water used and gallons yield supplied. High capital cost also provide redundancy to RWT. What does that all mean? Sorry.
So it has a high capital cost, but the cost per gallon of water that it supplies is reasonable.
Okay.
Look compared to some other alternatives. And then the other piece of it is that we currently have one water treatment plant. It would provide redundancy to that one water treatment plant.
Okay. So it does appear that this is competitive cost-wise with Jordan Lake, because I think it's the same language for Jordan Lake. For the cost.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's
and,
in the same ballpark area,
right.
I think.
And then it sounds like agreeing with the Western intake partners guaranteed access to Jordan Lake. At that time, it was still unknown, and it sounds like you're assessing that, or to what degree do you know what those costs are now?
For
Or
an
the
agreement?
second option of actually participating in the infrastructure development with the partners as opposed to the agreement.
Yeah, those costs, we keep updating them. So that's why there's been some more recent ones than that August 2021. But
compared to direct potable reuse, how's it?
Right, it costed out lower when we did it in this past January. And I have to go back and look at, is that based on assumptions, and how did that change? We tried to make consistent kind of like rates of inflation and things like that between all the alternatives. But
Okay. Okay.
And then, but you just asked, I can't remember what,
was
my
just
brain is starting to.
I was just wondering, because
didn't
it sounds like
answer all of
there's
it.
two options for Jordan Lake that the board is still considering. One is actually participating with the partners to develop the new treatment facility and the piping of
Right.
the water. And the other
then-
one is simply, more simply, be a full partner. It's more of an agreement.
It's an
with them.
agreement, yeah. So
Obviously, the second one's going to be cheaper than,
it'll be cheaper, and the costs that we can provide the board will be much more speculative. I mean, I think it's easier to talk about infrastructure
right?
in terms of,
So I guess what I'm getting at is I'm still, given that there's more honing in clearly in terms of what the costs are for Jordan Lake, and that wasn't really done when the assessment of these alternatives was, it was done, but not to the same degree. When the deciding of what to drop off of the full list happened, I would be interested in knowing how Jordan Lake compares to direct potable reuse, given that it was already competitive back then, you know?
yeah, and I can provide you all with the updated table that we did in this
That'd be great.
past January that looks at those 5 finalists.
Yeah, okay, that would be very helpful. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Ruth. Thanks, Sammy, for that. I agree. I would like to know that as well. And just have some more information about direct potable reuse in particular, and the opportunity that this council might have to discuss that option with our legislative delegation and change the statute. I think Ruth and I talked a little bit about this a couple weekends ago. And I know that's more in our bailiwick than it is in Owasa's, but I think there's interest, at least among a couple of council members, to explore that topic at the state level. And I think having some of the information that Sammy asked for would be helpful, just so we feel a little
Yeah,
bit more
absolutely.
educated about it. Just a couple of quick questions, and they may be things that you can come back with offline if you don't have that answers at your fingertips. But one of them is really not so much a question, more of an observation. It's something that came up in your recent community presentation in Chapel Hill at the library a couple weeks ago, and that is that the operating understanding of how we access Jordan Lake today is really, or from other jurisdictions today, is and has been for a long time, that Owasa only accepts water from other jurisdictions in emergency situations. And so that's essentially the approach that's been taken over many years, is that the Wasamba, the agreement that between the parties basically says you can only accept water from other jurisdictions in emergencies. I'm oversimplifying. But the idea behind going to Jordan Lake through this Western Intake Partnership is to, as you've said it, and tonight you used the word augment our supply. And I believe the other day when we were at the community presentation, you used the word supplement, but same idea. But the idea that it's a different approach than simply going to Jordan Lake or other sources in cases of emergency. That implies to me that this is in many more other cases than simply emergencies. You explained it a little bit at that community presentation. I wonder if you could just share with us in this public meeting, like, what does that augmenting look like if it's different than simply using Jordan Lake water in emergency situations?
Right, and so that could change over time as our demands go up, but while our risk is low, I would see that more in a way of we might ask for it proactively as we see our reservoirs depleting, and considering maybe what the climate office is predicting in terms of weather, that if we felt like we want to back off, particularly of using Cane Creek Reservoir, that we might proactively go to Jordan Lakes to try to get Cane Creek to recover a little bit, or, but try to avoid, or we may want to avoid some of those peak periods when they may be at peak treatment, near their peak treatment capacity. So we could supplement kind of in that way during non-peak periods and being able to get some kind of guaranteed access. So you could also look at it, we could have it any time, and you'd probably pay more for that, right? So I think it all is still kind of to be determined as we work through this process.
I think it's a really interesting point and important point for community members to understand better about the intent behind the partnership, which is that not only the difference in emergency versus augmenting, but also just better understanding what that access looks like, how often and for what durations we would access these other sources, that kind of thing. So I just offer that as a maybe just request for more information as you present this plan to the community. The second is you base the graph that you showed us, which is really helpful that shows both this future supply as well as future projected demand, is based in part on data that you're getting from TJ-COG that comes up from the individual jurisdictions about future projected population growth and so on. Wondering if when you are looking at projecting demand based on those numbers that you get from TJ-COG, is that there's like a sort of a basic like average per person water demand, or is it more sophisticated than that?
Not a whole lot more sophisticated than that.
I wondered
It's
about
per, we did it by residential unit, and we broke out single-family residential versus multifamily residential. And then the iffiest part is the commercial square footage, because that TJ-COG stuff was done for transportation planning, and so they had like, how many customers might they have coming in, which might not be related. So we did go back and look at our customer data and try to come up with a reasonable kind of average amount of use per 1,000 square feet of commercial. So we had from TJ-COG number of single-family, multifamily, and commercial square footage.
That's helpful. I guess I raised that question because I'm thinking about this projected growth and demand on the water system in terms of the forms that development can take.
Yes.
And the different kinds of demand that different forms of development place on a water system. And
Correct.
so if you're watering a lawn, for example,
Mm-hmm.
that's a lot of water. If you don't have a lawn because you live in if your development form is such that lawns are no longer a thing, then that's a very different kind of demand on the water system. And so I say that not so much for Ruth's benefit because she knows all of this, but really for those of us on this side of the table who are responsible for the planning and development of this community and how we develop, that is an important thing to be keeping in mind, that the form that development takes has implications for our demand, our community-wide demand on the water supply. So
yes.
Thank you so
Amy,
much.
Could I make a point to that?
Quickly, please.
Yes, but it's interesting because Owasa depends on revenue generation. So on the one hand, conservation is a problem, and we're kind of stuck in this treadmill. So I think the challenge is how to get off of that in a way that you can still be fiscally sound. Do conservation, demand reduction through alternatives of the built form, and yet still maybe not make as many investments that you then need to pay for. It's chicken and egg thing, right? Yeah.
Thanks, Sammy. So we had some okay, Barbara?
It's short. It's very short. Could you go back to the wheel? I call it the wheel. I guess the progress wheel. I mean, it was farther back. Just trying to see where. Oh, there it is. And so we're at number 9, community engagement. And so I know you've been out in the community talking most recently, I think at the library, maybe.
Yeah.
So what's your community engagement period like? Like what is your time frame for the last phase of, it looks like adopt and then pursue strategy? Okay.
Yeah, so we're looking to take the board kind of a summary of what we heard through this community engagement process in June, and then also give them, here are kind of the Jordan Lake kind of alternatives against one another, looking potentially at those interests. And we'd really like them because the Western Intake Partnership is moving forward. We need to know, are we on that train or are we not on that train? So they do need to make a decision fairly quickly here. So we're looking, yeah,
Okay.
the Owasa Board of Directors, yeah.
Thank you. That was all
Barbara.
from me.
So we've had some great questions from council members and a couple of requests for information, a little bit more information about what that augmenting of supply looks like, kind of what does that access to Jordan Lake look like. Sammy had a question about, I'm already forgetting, more information about, we talked about direct potable reuse, and raised this the other day with you, Ruth, that it feels to me like the kind of thing that can be explored alongside other alternatives. I don't see any reason why it's exploring direct potable reuse is exclusive of.
I think every water supply planner out there will tell you flexibility is always a good thing, and options is always a good thing.
I'll just say
so.
to my colleagues that I think that we have an opportunity here to learn more about that with our legislative delegation. Sammy asked for more information about the process for collecting and analyzing wastewater data, and I can get you more information from the county about how they access that from the state, because it's really happening at the state level. And then, did I miss anything? Randy had, we had multiple people, including Randy, questions about PFAS, PFOA, and how we plan to deal with what will probably be a long-term problem.
And how we communicate some of our data. Right. Okay.
Right, that's right. And the dashboard that Barbara brought up. Yeah.
So Danny's point about
And Danny's pointed to Todd about how the town might help with closing the gap once we know what that gap looks like for people paying their water bills.
Could I ask one last quick question? Just because we will be needing to appoint, and you'd mentioned that this question is something that hopefully would be decided by your board soon. How soon, just so we get a sense in terms of having Carrboro representation on there or not by appointing?
You have it till the end of.
Right, but the question is, okay, is it going to happen after the end of June?
I think staff can answer that. Maybe our board members know how long it's going to take them to decide.
I think at the end of the day, we need to make appointments to the Owasso board as soon as possible.
As soon as possible,
So
and hopefully in
let's
time
just
to
keep
make,
our eye on that.
make their vote on this question. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you all. Thanks,
Thank you.
Yinka. Congratulations for many years of service. Really appreciate it. You've got a couple months left, though, so hang in there.
Still serving. Yes.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Ruth. Good to see you again. All right, Mr. Manager.
The next item is a resolution for council final approval for financing up to $12,650,000 for the 203 project and approval of financing contract with Truist Bank. The purpose of this item is for the town council to approve a final resolution for financing the 203 South Greensboro Street project and approve a financing contract with Truist Bank. And the contract will be for 20 years at an interest rate of 2.82%. And our bond counsel, Bob Jessup, is here with Sanford Holthauser to answer the questions you may have. And before, if you have any questions, I do want to report that we did learn today that LGC did approve our application, so we're good with the LGC.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That's great news. Do council members have questions for our bond counsel? I appreciate you sitting through our entire meeting tonight, waiting for this moment in the spotlight. Council members, any questions about the resolution that's before us? I'm not seeing any hands. Susan?
I'm not sure if this is the time to ask the question. It's about the part of the contract dealing with space for WECOM. And is that part of this section, or am I waiting to ask that question? Oh.
Okay. Why don't you go ahead and come up to the podium and introduce yourself to the public who are watching at home. Thank you. And welcome.
Hi, my name's Bob Jessup. I'm a lawyer with the firm Sanford Holthauser. Our office is on Lloyd Street, and I'm happy to say I've been working as bond counsel for Carrboro for now well over 10 years. So I'm delighted to be here tonight to answer any questions or otherwise talk about the resolution.
Susan, what was your question?
Right. I have just one really quick question. And it's a question out of curiosity, really, but in the contract itself, there was mention that the space that WECOM is currently using can only be leased to other 501c3s. And I was curious why that is. In other words, what if there were an opportunity someday to use that as entrepreneurial space or what have you? Why would we not want to be using it for that?
The primary reason for that we've described this limitation is because of federal tax laws that apply to local government borrowing. The federal tax laws limit how much space in a building can be used by non-governments, non-501c3s, and still qualify for the benefit of the lower interest rates through tax-exempt financing. Now, also in discussion with the lender, we're telling the lender right now we're only going to have 550 feet and we're only going to have a 501c3. If you wanted to expand beyond that, we would need to go back to the lender for their permission, and we'd have to test the amount of space you were leasing to any all of your non-governmental entities at the time against this rather high 5% of the building limitation. But it's there as a guardrail to make sure that the town doesn't inadvertently or without telling anybody run afoul of those tax guidelines and trigger the rate increase provisions that are in the contract.
Oh, that's really helpful. Thank you.
And clearer. Thank you.
Just,
Sammy.
very quickly, what is the rate increase if we were to do that?
Essentially, if you violate the tax rules, you end up having to pay truists what they would have earned. You basically have to switch to a taxable rate, retroactive. So you probably, depending on tax rates at the time.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. All right, the recommendation from staff is that we adopt the resolution in the packet. Is there a motion?
Move to adopt.
Okay. And moved by Danny and seconded by Barbara that we adopt the resolution. Any more discussion?
Just mention, just as consistency with my previous votes, I won't be voting for this tonight.
Thank you, Sammy. I do appreciate you. I mean, we need to have that on the table. That's important. Thank you. Okay, all in favor, please say aye.
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 All opposed, please say no.
No.
Matter passes 5-1, Mary, with Sammy dissenting.
Appreciate
Thanks so
the
much.
opportunity to be here tonight and to have had the chance to work for you on this project.
We
Thanks.
appreciate your work, and I hope you learned something about water supply management tonight.
I only have to come to 2 or 3 meetings a month, and I find everyone interesting in some way. Thank you
Excellent.
very
That's
much.
why you're good at your job. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bob.
All right. Okay, next is matters by council members.
I do have a matter, actually.
Okay, Sammy?
So I believe Chapel Hill Transit's going to be they finally got their bus stops, and so they're going to be
Started getting them in.
replacing
That's right.
now. And I would like for us to think of uses of the old bus stops, and a specific use I'm thinking of is for the corner where the day workers are. They would benefit a lot with something more dignified in which to sit in. And I've actually gone by there and asked them, and they're very excited about the possibility. So I would like to make a motion asking our town manager to relocate some of those for that corner.
Well, I should say that they don't belong to the town, so the town manager can't do that.
Those do, don't they? Because we
Belong to Chapel Hill Transit.
I thought we maintained them.
Oh, you mean asking about the wooden ones?
Yeah.
Well, maybe could you modify your motion to ask our representatives on the Partners Committee to take this idea to Chapel Hill Transit and see
But if those are Chapel Hill Transit,
if they are theirs. We need to find out.
I'm pretty sure they're ours because we repair them. I remember not so long ago the
That's right.
cover on the top was dilapidated, and it was Public Works that repaired those.
Yeah.
It's
So
not
let's
really-
find out the details of whose responsibility they are. But you are right. Some of those
If
older
it is
ones.
ours, then to move 2 of those to that corner. That's my motion.
Even the newer ones, since they're going to be moving. Anyway, the older, newer ones.
Sure, some good ones.
Can I just ask something?
Yeah.
That Mr. Manager, if you would get up with the CASA of Employment and Leadership folks, and because they have workers on the advisory board that would be the go-to leaders at La Quinta, which is the corner.
Yeah, and related to that, the other opportunities, well, I don't know, legally, it may be very cumbersome, but if there is an opportunity to use their services to move it, then that would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
I appreciate this recommendation, Sammy. I think it would be valuable to get some information about, first of all, who has responsibility for the structures and what happens to them, and then ultimately just some staff kind of due diligence around what that would look like, involving the El Centro Worker Center folks, rather than just immediately saying we're going to do that, because that feels a little bit like we need more information to me. I don't, that's
Okay, I mean, just as long as you don't throw them in the trash, just hold on to them.
yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Does that sound okay, Sammy?
Yeah, friendly
Is there a
amendment.
second to Sammy's motion?
So moved.
moved by Sammy, seconded by Randy, that we direct manager to find out more information about who's responsible for those old shelters that'll be taken down as they're replaced, and how they might be used to provide shelter at the corner of Davie and Jones
At the
Fair,
corner and other places.
and potentially other places.
I'm thinking also of the pump jack. While we do have a couple benches, they're not covered. It'd be nice to have some covered benches there, and maybe other parks. Who knows? Thank you.
Thanks, Sammy. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Matter passes unanimously. All right. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved. Second.
Moved by Barbara and seconded by Sammy that we adjourn with happy birthday wishes to Danny and Randy. All in favor, please say aye.
Barbara.
Aye. Any
Aye.
opposed, say no. Matter passes unanimously.